The moment Tamar Braxton spoke the words that she had nearly lost her life, the internet froze and then erupted all at once. Because in a culture trained to read between lines, what she did not say immediately carried as much weight as what she did. And while sympathy poured in from fans, peers, and commentators alike, confusion followed closely behind when her account of the incident arrived wrapped in emotion, but absent of clarity, creating a vacuum that social media is uniquely designed to fill. She spoke about waking up injured, disoriented, missing teeth, surrounded by blood, with no memory of how she arrived in that condition. And for many listeners, that alone was enough to trigger alarm. Yet for others, the details she omitted became the focal point, especially as people began retracing her public movements from the night before, noticing who had been present, who had been photographed, and who had last been seen in her company. And in that slow-motion replay of events, one name surfaced repeatedly. Not because it was spoken aloud by Tamar, but because it was never denied, and in the digital age, silence has a way of transforming into implication, whether intended or not. Funky Dineva found himself at the center of a storm he says he did not create, watching as speculation hardened into assumption while he waited for a clarification that never came. And when he finally addressed the situation publicly, his message was not theatrical but firm, emphasizing that he had nothing to do with Tamar's injuries and directly asking her to clear his name if that was indeed the truth. A request that on its face seemed simple yet carried enormous weight, because by then the narrative had already begun to settle in the public imagination. And when no direct correction followed, the internet interpreted that absence in multiple ways, some seeing it as trauma-induced silence, others as avoidance, and still others as a quiet endorsement of suspicion. As days turned into weeks, Tamar continued to reference her ordeal in broad terms, confirming the seriousness of her condition and the medical intervention required, yet consistently steering clear of addressing the individual most affected by the speculation. And this prolonged ambiguity became the fault line that split public opinion. With one side insisting she owed no one an explanation beyond her own healing, and the other arguing that allowing another person's reputation to be quietly eroded crossed a line from privacy into irresponsibility. Funky, increasingly frustrated, shifted from defense to context, explaining that his discomfort with certain dynamics in Tamar's orbit predated the incident entirely, particularly her interactions with Mendeecees, a married man publicly associated with Yandy Smith, clarifying that his unease was not retroactive justification, but something he had voiced long before anything went wrong, and while he stopped short of accusing anyone of wrongdoing. He painted a picture of blurred boundaries that many viewers found unsettling, not because it proved anything, but because it complicated the simplified narrative that had initially formed. When Funky described the night ending in a shared Uber ride and claimed he chose not to accompany Tamar upstairs due to feeling uncomfortable with what he perceived during that ride, the detail mattered less as evidence and more as explanation, offering a reason for his absence that reframed earlier assumptions. And as this account circulated, comment sections began to shift tone, with some people reconsidering why he would voluntarily remove himself from the situation if he had something to hide, while others dismissed his claims as self-serving, underscoring how perception often outweighs proof in public discourse. The story expanded further when Funky referenced a prior dinner involving Tamar and Mendeecees, recalling conversations about public statements and marital optics that, when revisited in hindsight, took on new significance for audiences hungry for coherence. And although no independent confirmation emerged, the specificity of Funky's recollections contrasted sharply with Tamar's continued generality, creating an imbalance that fueled skepticism even among those initially inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt. The introduction of a third individual, mentioned by Funky as being present around the time of the incident and described by Tamar as someone who later found her injured, added another layer of uncertainty, not because it clarified events, but because it widened the circle of unanswered questions, prompting the internet to speculate wildly in the absence of facts. A speculation Tamar eventually condemned in a formal statement that emphasized the emotional harm caused by rumors and warned of consequences should they continue, signaling a pivot from storytelling to legal framing that many interpreted as an attempt to regain control of a narrative that had already escaped its originator. Funke's reaction to the prospect of legal action was notably unflinching, as he reiterated his experience navigating controversy and lawsuits, standing by his account without escalation, a posture that some viewers read as confidence and others as provocation, further entrenching divided loyalties. As the public discourse evolved, attention gradually shifted from the mystery of the night itself to the handling of its aftermath, with critics arguing that the real damage stemmed not from what happened, but from how it was communicated, pointing out that the initial lack of clarity allowed speculation to metastasize into belief, while supporters countered that demanding linear storytelling from someone processing trauma was both unrealistic and cruel. Over time, the internet began excavating Tamar's past, resurfacing old rumors and unresolved controversies not as proof, but as pattern, a move her defenders decried as misogynistic and unfair, yet one that nonetheless influenced perception in a space where repetition often substitutes for evidence. And as sympathy became conditional, Funke's consistency gained traction among viewers who saw in his steadiness a counterpoint to what they perceived as shifting narratives, even as others cautioned against equating composure with truth. Eventually, fatigue set in, not because interest vanished but because certainty never arrived, leaving audiences to choose between competing interpretations rather than verified facts. And in that unresolved space, the story crystallized into a cautionary tale about implication, silence, and the irreversible momentum of public narratives, illustrating how in the absence of early clarity, stories take on lives of their own, reshaping reputations and relationships regardless of intent. Until the original question of what truly happened becomes secondary to a more enduring one about responsibility in the age of constant commentary, where saying less can sometimes say far more than anyone intends.